What's happening, guys? So we are back from the dyno. Basically, we're just here to kind of tell you some of the problems and how we solve some of those issues. I know the kind of dyno video we left off with some of the issues coming back from the dyno. Getting up to like 203, 204.
Last run we blew the throttle cable off.
But obviously excited that the engine worked, ran pretty flawlessly, and it worked good for a brand new fully built engine, or fully built bottom end, I should say. One of the issues we were having on the dyno is some overheating that we were trying to chase. I wasn't really too sure what it was on the dyno. We thought it potentially was that SQ Engineering back piece, but it turns out it had nothing to do with that at all. Basically, long story short, I built an entire engine but put the thermostat upside down. Who would have thought? I kind of just was like looking at forums and whatnot and trying to figure out, diagnose my issue. Turns out if you clock the thermostat 180 degrees the wrong way, which is exactly what I did, it'll do exactly what you were seeing on the dyno. It basically there was no hot fluid in that bottom pipe. And basically it would take a ton of time to burp itself and then open the thermostat because it wasn't allowing any hot coolant to get past this jiggle valve. Because basically this little jiggle valve, which is what it's called, I guess, needs to be at the top or at the dead mark where you're casting. We'll show it. The beams casting has a little mark. This has to line up with that. I think it's pretty much at 12 o'clock. But if it's not, that's the issue we got. So super simple fix. Now onto the charge issue. Obviously we were chasing a little bit of that coolant issues, but we were able to get through the dyno and it started to bring temperature down once the thermostat did finally open. So where we got to eventually was the car made 313 wheel horsepower around there at very similar PSI to what it made before, about 2 pounds more, like 13 PSI. What we were chasing, as you guys saw in the video, was it stopped charging. So it basically would get up to about 6,500 RPM. It was kind of inconsistent. Sometimes it would get up to 7 and just lose charge, but was charging all the way up to there. So we just saw the battery voltage start falling off, and at a certain point, all the sensors and ECU, everything was just not happy. As soon as it got down into like obviously the 12s, it just got really, really unhappy and basically was getting a little dangerous at that point. So at that point, Brett was like, we can't really go any further, so we'll probably leave the tune here and then we'll just have to figure it out. So what we tried to fix on the dyno, as you guys saw, is we tried to ground the car more. We thought it was some of the grounds. So we tried a few things on the dyno, nothing worked. So when I got home, the first thing I tried to do was play with some of the grounds. So I took one of the things I did while the engine was out was I powder coated the alternator bracket, which I've seen on forums that the alternator bracket obviously grounds the alternator to the engine. So that's a big problem if you powder coat all your mounts. So I grinded those off, grinded as much spots as I could off to ground the alternator better, and then went out and logged it and nothing changed. Once the car was up on load with boost, same thing, 6,500, 7, just stopped. So at that point I was like, okay, well maybe it's the alternator itself, which this alternator was redone not too long ago for a higher amp rate. So I sent it out to a shop. They said it was perfectly fine. They bench tested a bunch. I told him the problems I was having and he said it definitely is not the alternator. So at that point we were like, I have no idea what's going on. So it turns out one of the wires under the dash that basically is an exciter wire to a bulb in the dash was unplugged. I guess in my rewiring and whatnot, I guess I forgot to plug it back in. But basically what the bulb does is it acts as a resistor and triggers the alternator to keep charging. If that is unconnected, or not connected, if the alternator would try to excite itself, but eventually be really inconsistent and fail. And so that's basically what we were having in a nutshell. Nothing to do with the ECU whatsoever. It was basically just one of the wires to the alternator was just not hooked up, which is a big blunder on my part, but at least the engine ran well and worked great.
I keep thinking about this because Jason, our nutcase friend, who's way smarter than us, was saying that It is the exciter wire. It's the 12 volt exciter wire, but it's not enough to just have the 12 volts there. It has to have resistance.
Yep.
Otherwise, the alternator will start to act erratically. It'll drop off voltage. It won't be charging based on electrical load. It just does like all sorts of wonky stuff. So the fact that it's connected isn't good enough. It has to be connected to the bulb.
The bulb just acts as that little bit of resistance to tell it to keep going, I guess, which news to me, but that's exactly how it's set up. So, but yeah, which is really weird that it was that consistent. Like, and Jason said he's seen alternators do all sorts of weird stuff when they don't have that. Mine was obviously very consistent. As soon as it had a ton of load, it just would fall off, which you know, Steve said to me before, maybe that could have been the cause of issues we had at the track last year, basically losing some sensors, which we thought was crank sensor, you know, or related when the engine got hurt. It could have been that. It could have been unconnected since then.
It definitely makes you wonder. It doesn't really matter what bent the rod. Like, it's good now. We know to look for it, but I mean, small battery, there was issues with your starter switch. Like, who knows what could have happened? Yeah, it blew my mind when that ended up to be the only real issue that stopped us.
Since then, car has been at the track. So it's still running good. The alternator problems are solved, and then the cooling problems are solved. You'll see it in later videos, but now one of the issues we're working with is some of the valve cover breathing. Like the head breathing is just, these stock valve covers just clearly aren't enough for some of the breathing now with the turbo setup. And obviously that makes sense because we got the rings a little bit looser. So just gonna have more breathing once you pressurize it. So since the dyno, what we did here, since we figured out the charging situation and the heating situation, Jason was able to pull some logs and do some street tuning. And since obviously the base of the tune was already quite set up and we're running 13 PSI, all we did was carry that map a little bit further up to, you know, the 7-8 grand mark. It now is on 15, 16 PSI, I think, like, yeah, 15 PSI up top. And so we're not really sure what sort of horsepower it's making now. It probably is in, like, for me, I think it's probably in like the 330 range, maybe 330 wheel. It's hard to say. It does feel quicker, that's for sure. But yeah, Jace was able to play with some of the timing, some of the ignition up top, and just make it a little bit more better street manners and whatnot. But we haven't been back to the dyno, so it'll be interesting to see what that little bit of tweaking, a little bit more RPM will net. But I'm thinking around the 330 mark. I don't think too much more than that, but who knows? We'll see if we can get it back on a dyno later down the road, just to kind of see what those numbers are. All right, guys. Well, that'll be that. Just wanted to let you know how the car went after the dyno, because I know there was some questions on some comments on the video. But that's that, guys, and stay tuned and see you in the next video.